Let's get back to the conflict in the Middle East, and there are credible reports, including from the Wall Street Journal, that Donald Trump has approved an attack plan against Iran. But publicly, the president is keeping his powder dry.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate.
I asked former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer about the likely shape of any US military action.
The objective here is to destroy any capacity Iran has to develop nuclear weapons. And that means, amongst other things, destroying the centrifuges, the enrichment facilities at Fordow. There is no way the Americans would have any intention of sending ground troops into Iran and trying to change the regime. They certainly will not do that. And by the way, nor would the Israelis. Any regime change that takes place in Iran, and let's face it, most Iranians would like to change the regime, that will be left entirely to the Iranian people themselves. I mean, you know, it might be that the Americans provide them with communication support, or the Israelis provide them with communication support. You saw the Israelis hacked into the Iranian TV station with messages calling for the Iranian people to rise up against the regime. Those sorts of support might be possible, but ultimately regime change is going to be a matter for the Iranian people.
All right, I want to talk about the Australian government's response, which I think has been absolutely pathetic and missed a very important opportunity here. Here's a little bit of what Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, had to say on the weekend.
What I would say is the key issue is not, is there a threat? There is. We all know that. It's whether or not, in response to it, we increase the risk of regional escalation. And that would have dire consequences to the people of the region. So that is why Australia has said, we urge de-escalation, we urge restraint, we urge dialogue and diplomacy.
Penny Wong there talking about dialogue and diplomacy. No words of support for the Israeli action or the Americans supporting that action, and no words of condemnation for Iran initially. She did strengthen her language yesterday where she said the easiest way to resolve this would be for Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions finally. But why couldn't she have said that on day one and at least given support to Israel's action?
As the Australian government's position on this issue and then on many other Middle Eastern issues is just an embarrassment, honestly. They're humiliating our country with these sorts of words. Of course, de-escalation isn't the solution. The solution is to destroy any capacity Iran has to launch nuclear missiles at Israel. That is the objective of the exercise here. De-escalation is utterly meaningless, utterly meaningless. And by saying things like that, the Australian government is making itself a laughingstock in Jerusalem, and nobody in Tehran cares what they say either. Australia is playing itself into a position of complete international irrelevance by saying these sorts of things. I just find it embarrassing. I mean, worse than embarrassing, I find it almost humiliating that our country can't take a simple, clear position against nuclear weapons being used by Iran, and more than that, by instead of berating the Israelis and demanding they agree to a two-state solution, berate the Iranians and demand that they accept Israel's right to exist. They stop supporting terrorist attacks on Israel by proxy organizations. And then, when that happens, we can talk about a two-state solution. But they berate Israel, but they never berate Iran. I mean, I find it absolutely incredible.
Now, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think this is worth doing for the issues themselves, in its own right, if you like. But to look at how this plays into our US alliance relationship at a time when the Australian government is desperate to get attention and favour from Washington, wouldn't our diplomatic support, no one's suggesting Australia gets involved in any way militarily, but wouldn't our strong diplomatic support here actually give some moral support and much needed diplomatic support to the US?
Of course. I mean, basically, the US is the leader of the Western alliance, but it needs allies. I mean, this is where the British government has been, on the whole, much cleverer. I mean, British Labour government has been much cleverer than the Australian Labour government. Keir Starmer has worked with Donald Trump. Of course, he's met Donald Trump many times since Trump became the president, unlike our poor, benighted Prime Minister, who is unable to even get a meeting with him. But Keir Starmer has been supporting efforts that the Americans have made to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine. And of course, they're supporting the Americans in the Middle East as well. It's not too difficult for the Australian government to be a supporter of the United States. They might not like Donald Trump and they may not support the Republican Party and all of that. There's much more at stake here than the Republican Party or Donald Trump. There is the very survival of Israel, and that should be an issue of passion for the Australian people. But the Australian government, it just calls for de-escalation. I find it embarrassing.
Thanks for joining us, Alexander. Spot on from Alexander Downer there, hey?